I really enjoyed those presentations, so thank you, the three of you, for that. They were very thought-provoking and interesting. And so I want to actually now get our new arrivals on the panel to introduce themselves by talking to a couple of questions from me. So Tani, I'm going to ask you first. Interestingly, we heard from Klaus, I think it was, about the degree to which it's wrong to talk about the Arctic as though it's a monolith, and people have different interests, and there's, to me, not a hugely helpful word, but we use it a lot, intersectionality, so that different groups have different interests, and it's important to see where the crossover is and where people have different interests. So you work particularly in terms of sort of women in the Arctic. So are there some gender issues that we need to put out on the table when we're talking about the future of Arctic communities and their resilience and their adaptability? Talk to me in terms of what you see as being gender issues.
How much time do you have? There's so many. Most often when we talk about resilient Arctic communities, women are often referenced as a backbone of those communities. Yet you come to conferences and you read a lot about the Arctic, and women are quite often not found. Gender-related issues are not discussed. The opening panel today was, unheard of, an all-female panel.
You know what? It's the first, I do a lot of moderating and panel discussing, and I have to say today generally, but that first panel in particular was fantastic. It was amazing because it was, it felt great, but it was dominated by women, which was fantastic.
And Twitter was a buzz, right? Everyone's like, "This is shocking. What is happening here?"
Yeah.
Which is, wonderful. That's a great first step. But if you talk about resilient Arctic communities, you need to make sure that women don't leave. There's a significant amount of outmigration that is happening across the Arctic, except in Russia. And so that has a huge impact on the fabric of northern communities.
But on a previous panel, we heard that a lot of that outmigration of women is driven by women seeking out higher levels of education in a way that a lot of the males in the communities, for one reason or another, are not doing. So, I mean, you could regard it, obviously it's a negative in terms of what happens to those communities, but it's a positive in terms of women pursuing their aspirations,
right,
and their higher educational goals.
Yeah, I think it's a side effect of women having choices. I think there's also many Arctic communities where women don't necessarily have the choice, even to move away from their own homes. There's housing shortages in parts of Canada, northern Canada, and you have high levels of gender-based violence as well in many northern communities. In Alaska Native women and Indigenous women in the U.S. in general, there's 84% of them experience some form of violence during their lifetime. So that's something that needs to be taken into consideration if you want to be smart. Give people of all genders equal choices.
How?
Investing in education for both men and women. I think women's roles have generally remained the same. A lot of Arctic communities were matriarchal until first contact and settlement. And a lot of the women have maintained their roles as head of households in terms of, making sure that food is distributed in a particular way. It's actually men who face a lot of challenges in terms of globalization as well. There's so many other reasons for this. Colonization is one of the largest factors, but ensuring that the burden doesn't only fall on women. The burden of resilience shouldn't just fall on women, because in that case, resilience isn't good.
Yes. Okay, well, that's thought-provoking, and I dare say there will be people who want to pick up on that in the audience. Erik, I'd like to hear from you as well. You're a parliamentarian. You represent Nordland. There are issues here concerning the degree to which the northern regions get a fair voice, are listened to in Norway. And then there's issues about whether the political system really, is in tune with the needs of this region, the far north of Norway in this case. And what do you think the answer is?
Well, I also has engagement as the head of the Parliament's Arctic delegation for cooperation. And I have the need to emphasize today, and a lot of you have heard me speak about this earlier, that the Arctic, and we are discussing development in the Arctic, it's first and foremost about the people living in the Arctic. And I think, and one question here today, which I think we should ask us, if the Arctic is going to be smart, if it hasn't been smart yet, who is going to make it smart? Is it people coming from the outside, teaching the people living in the Arctic how to be smart with new technology, new knowledge? Or is it the people in the Arctic, in the different kinds of Arctic, being the northern or the Scandinavian Arctic, the American or the Russian Arctic? Are they going to be the smart people creating solutions for the future?
Right, but it's not a binary thing, is it? You're presenting it as though it's an either or, with a sort of implication that there's some sort of conflict of interest between the two, but surely...
Yeah, but I think it is. I think it is. Because, yes, in your question you are asking, do the national politics get the sense of what do you need in the north? So if you are coming from the outside, helping us to a better future, I'm living in Bodø, just north of the Arctic Circle. Is something from Oslo? Is the minister coming to help me to get a better life?
I'm not from Oslo.
No, okay, I'm sorry. But representing the central government, living in Oslo, governing from Oslo, are you or from Washington DC coming to Alaska, teaching the Alaskans how to live their lives? No. Have I said a lot which people haven't heard?
I don't know. I was hearing you great, but hands up, were people hearing Eric okay? Or, yeah, pretty well, half and half. Okay, anyway, carry on, Eric.
Yeah, carry on. Yeah, the point being, the most important resource we have in the north, as every other place at Earth where there are people living, are the people living there. They are the experts. But of course there are a gap. We heard Erlend Bullvåg talking earlier today about innovation gap. We have been hearing about gender gaps, and I think there are a dimension here north-south. It's pan-Arctic. There are differences between the north and south. It's really a central peripheral axis, but it's going north-south in all the Arctic countries. And the major task we have now is helping the people in the north, closing that gap, having the same opportunities to developing their lives and living good lives by their own measurements in the north.
What I'm trying to get to is whether you sound as though you are suspicious of the agenda of people who say they want to help from the outside. And I'm not. Is suspicion a useful emotion to be feeling as we talk about, developing the Arctic?
Yeah, but...
Are you suspicious?
Okay, we don't have much time, so I have to be short, and some nuances could get lost in translation here. So the short answer is yes. Because it's a major discussion amongst parliamentarians internationally and nationally. How do we get benefits from extraction industries?
Right.
How do we get benefits living in the north, giving over fjords, for those doing working with fish, how do we get benefits from that? How do we get jobs, financial benefits, the possibilities for education? Is it enough? And we have a lot of examples where you don't have gotten enough. And therefore I am suspicious.
You are suspicious.
Yeah.
I'm very taken by the difference in your mindset and tone from Göran's. Here's Göran. I don't know where Göran's from originally, but he's obviously very dedicated now to his community in Kiruna. And
I am very dedicated, and I would like to respond both to what we just heard, but also to the gender question.
Yeah, go on.
I mean, Kiruna was, when we had the mining industry as dominating, it was an extremely male-dominated society. The whole culture was male, male, male. And women either became housewives or they moved south. So I think it's extremely important what has happened now, that we have had this input from the outside, getting these new industries. In research, space industry, you get a fairly good proportion of women. And we can look at the tourism industry, I would say that many of the most successful, brilliant entrepreneurs we have come from outside and are female. So I think that this is a wonderful response to the problem.
Yeah, but you seem to be talking a different language from Eric, because you said toward the end of your presentation, you said, look, we have whatever we have, 23,000 people now, but if we could only get, what was it, 10% or 1% or
1% of Sweden's population.
Of Sweden's population, and particularly of Stockholm, to be convinced that they should come and live in Kiruna, we'd have a community of 100,000. You don't seem to be seeing it through the prism of, people of the north having a different agenda from the people of the south.
I think the same goes for all of Swedish municipalities and cities. Cities and municipalities that have been isolated are going backwards. You need to have the input of ideas from other people, from other resources. So it's a vivid, flourishing society always has an import of
Göran
people.
just wants a completely open exchange of ideas, a fermentation of creativity. He believes it can happen in the Arctic North, even if it's being driven by people who come to the Arctic North from the south. You, on the other hand, seem to be saying, well, their agenda is different from ours, and we need to generate our own creativity and not rely on theirs. Otherwise, it's a sort of neo-colonialist model. Am I misreading things, or are you and he
No.
different ends of this?
Well, it's a different perspective, but of course, if we are going to develop the North with opportunities where we have something the rest of the world are needing, of course we will use the opportunity to develop our societies, helping the rest of the world. But we have to have a fair share. We have to take part, have to have the right to decide how to do this. We have to balance between traditional ways of living, new opportunities. It isn't true that the only way for a good living is to live by information economy solutions. Maybe someone wants to keep hunting seals, but they can't. So how do we help them to transform their own lives? In the best case would be, could they continue to hunt the seals?
Yeah.
But if there are no sea ice, what should we do?
Do you think we're in danger when we talk about smart cities and communities and the digital age and transformational economics? Are we in danger of losing something very important about the nature of the Arctic?
No, and I think we have to cope with this. The technology is going forward. We have to deal with it, both in the north and in the south. And I don't really understand this, them and us. I think we are a small, open economy, quite few people, 5 million. We have challenges in the south, in the north, in the west, but we have lots of opportunities, especially natural resources. So we have to cooperate nationally, regionally, locally, and we have to invest in, first of all, in knowledge, research, to have our skills. That's I think that's.
Is there anything you could quarrel with in that?
Yeah, of course I could, with the danger of this being a domestic Norwegian debate. But let's take one example. For example, the discussion about getting the oil and gas from the areas outside Lofoten and Vesterålen, big Norwegian debate. Now we haven't had the opportunity for that. And among causes for that is that the locals are now saying, no, thank you. This is my district, my waters. Why have they changed their mind? Because they don't think the risk is worth it. They don't think they will get enough back measured against the risk they are taking. And that someone don't understand. The oil industry haven't understood it yet. Now it seems like the Norwegian government isn't understanding these processes, because they are doubting that they will have benefits when someone from the outside, which are global companies, coming getting their resources, they will not have enough. But I'm sharing the view.
50 years ago, it wasn't in Stavanger the decision was made.
No.
It was in Norway, in the government, in the parliament.
Yeah.
So it should be.
Well, you're quite right that it's fascinating to hear an internal Norwegian debate, but we can't allow it to dominate everything, which is why at this diplomatic moment I'm going to turn to Klaus, because Because as they say in America, he doesn't have a dog in this particular fight, but he does have a fascinating overview. And I really enjoyed your presentation, Klaus, because you asked us to think very carefully about what smart is and what it means, and not to be too hubristic about the idea that right now in 2019 we've suddenly got all the answers and we're much smarter than we ever were before. So, thinking about what we've just heard in this internal Norwegian debate, does this play out across the Arctic, do you think, with still a search to be sure about what the best way forward is in terms of development and you know, delivering growth but in a smart way?
Well, let me answer this by sort of juxtaposing smartness and dumbness, as I sort of tried to offer you observation earlier. One of the problems I think, for example, northern communities and indigenous peoples have had is that outsiders have been exceptionally good at exploiting their smartness, exceptionally good at capitalizing on their smartness. So, for example, when British explorers had a tendency to get lost or find they may be a little bit longer on the ice than they expected, they owed their lives in many cases to the smartness of people who lived there. When, for example, the Hudson Bay Company wanted to exploit North American Arctic, it relied on the smartness of local people, indigenous communities, to say, yes, actually, here's some resource you can go and exploit. So I think what we're hearing here in a very different context is a very long-standing suspicion, which I think is well-founded, that smartness in the Arctic gets capitalized. In other words, that other people come along and make money out of it. And it might not always benefit the very communities who you're drawing upon to be smart. So I think, in other words, that when you ask communities to be smart or smarter, you need to ask yourself always, who is benefiting from this smartness? And when we, for example, talk about knowledge economies, right? I think we need to talk about knowledge solidarities. In other words, are we co-producing that knowledge? Are we co-circulating that knowledge? Are we co-consuming that knowledge? And to be honest, who is making money from that knowledge? And that's why you get concerns that are so keenly felt locally within the Arctic, I think, in my experience, that this benefit sharing is not always as straightforward and as transparent as it should be. And I think you'll find across the Arctic, every community will tell a story about feeling used and abused when it comes to Arctic smarts, to use an American term.
Very interesting. Okay, we don't have much time.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fantastic. I'm thrilled you are here to give us insights, but I'm just aware of the time, so I want to try and get a few thoughts or questions from our audience before we close. Oh, good idea. Very proactive. Yeah. Go on.
Me?
Oh, I thought I see you're doing the microphone. I thought you were about to ask a very important question. But nonetheless, there are people who are going to ask questions. Go on, sir.
Michael Byers, University of British Columbia. I wanted to underline something that Klaus said, and that perhaps helps Tani make her very important point. There are two different Arctics. When we talk about the Nordic Arctic, we're talking about countries that are leaders in terms of the equality of women, that are leaders in terms of social and economic equality. When we're talking about the rest of the Arctic, Russia, Northern Canada, Alaska, we're talking about places that are heavily reliant on the extractive industries, that have frontier towns, frontier mentalities, dealing with indigenous peoples who have been colonized and subjected and abused. In my country, in Canada, we have literally thousands of missing and murdered Aboriginal women that have literally disappeared because they haven't been valued and they haven't been protected by governments. We have the highest suicide rate in the world. We have intimate partner violence that is probably the highest in the world. It's a desperate situation because it's a different Arctic. So there are two different conversations. And I guess the question for Tani is, what can we in the rest of the Arctic learn from the Nordics so that we can do better to women and girls?
Okay, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but if you look at the Arctic, even in the Nordics, they don't fare so well, unfortunately. If you look at Iceland, always top of the list, there's only one women's shelter and it's underfunded. There's always more work to be done. A lot of indigenous women's groups across the Arctic have done a lot of the legwork without funding. So if we can fund a lot of these existing efforts that have been around for 25 or more years, I mean, that's really the least we can do, I'd say.
But you don't quite buy the notion that the Nordic Arctic is way more sort of, I don't know if the right word is progressive, but it's further down the track to genuine equality and the end of these abusive practices and everything else that the question suggested. You don't really buy that.
You still have high levels of intimate partner violence in northern Finland and northern Sweden and northern Norway. I mean, unless that's eradicated, I would say it's not fully done. So there's lots to be done.
Okay, thank you. Have we got more questions? We've got time for one more if a hand is going to shoot up at the last minute. Yep, go on. This, I'm afraid, will have to be our last one.
Yes. I'm Codacci from Italian news magazine L'Espresso. I would be curious to hear the two quarreling voices about foreign migrants in the north of Norwegia. And when I say foreign, I mean the kind of migrants that are a problem for Mediterranean European countries like Italy, Spain, and Greece. So people from Africa, Middle East, and India, Afghanistan, and Pakistan.
You mean migrants who
migrants to this part of the world
who come here seeking a better life, seeking work?
Yeah, because I feel people here should not be squeamish about having this kind of. You couldn't be too choosy about who comes to live here, but on the other hand, I'm afraid you might feel colonized by Asia if you had too many people from India or Afghanistan or from Morocco.
Well, I'm interested briefly to know in the Arctic communities, is there scope, do you think, for taking migrants, many of them fleeing poverty, some of them fleeing outright, oppression and real human danger? Is there a conversation in the Arctic about the degree to which you can take some of these people, migrants?
We don't have a different politics for migration in north than in south. We have one migration policy in Norway, and we have quite low migration the last couple of years. So we don't discuss whether we should have another migration policy in the north.
Despite the fact that, as we were hearing, that there are certain skills that, you wouldn't be interested in bringing in people who had particular skills that could help.
Yes, we can, but we can in all parts of Norway if we need. Yeah.
But we agree. We agree that we should have one policy for Norway.
Yeah.
But answering in another way, there's a lot of hospitality in the north. And people are welcome, making themselves alive inside, of course, the national immigration policies. But there's a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of hospitalities. And so I think most people moving to the north will feel themselves very welcome.
Well, that's an important point. And speaking as an outsider who comes in occasionally, I always feel very welcome. But we're going to have to stop now because we've run out of time. I just want to ask Göran one thing, just informational. I'm really interested in the Kiruna plan for the future. When can I come to New Kiruna and see this city of 100,000, which is the most smart, resilient city in the whole of the Arctic North?
We have two time perspectives here. You can see the new city, all completed, the city center, in 2021.
2021?
Yeah, we are in the middle of construction right now.
Wow. Great.
The 100,000.
Maybe Arctic
The
Frontiers.
100,000 is somewhat longer time span.
Yeah.
But I was just pointing at the option, the possibility.
No, I-
Seeing the possibility is halfway to the goal.
It was fascinating to hear you talk about it with passion and enthusiasm. But I think we have.
I'm an immigrant to Kiruna, so
Yeah, no, I get that.
very well accepted.
You're very pro-immigrant. I get that. Yeah. All right. I think my clock tells me we've run out of time. So.